folks. Why Would You Ask That is a podcast that answers some of the weirdest questions. A lot of those are inappropriate for some listeners. If you're squeamish, easily disturbed, or just having a bad day, this may not be for you. But if you've got to know the answers like we do, stay tuned.
Why Would You Ask That? Hosted by me, M, they, them, and
Karen, she, her, and
Remy, he, they.
And today, we're wondering what the fuck happened with feminism in the United States? Like the whole, what happened?
Is feminism racist? That's the question.
You're right. That is the question.
And is it just in America, or is it racist everywhere?
Fuck, I don't know. I've only ever been in 2 countries where I've thought feminism existed. The other ones I was too young to have a concept.
Based on my very important 4-year degree, I can tell you that feminism got a start, at least in Victorian England. And that's all I'm going to say, because other than that, I really don't know. So, Remy, you know quite a bit more on this subject. I know at least some of it, based on specifically a very white feminist view. But you understand feminism from a different viewpoint, which is very important and something that I want to learn more about. So, enlighten us.
So, I did do a lot of extensive studying on feminism during my bachelor's degree and my master's degree because I studied gender and sexuality for my master's degree in the way it affects literature, because that's what I was doing. But because I was doing that, I did a lot of classes that talked about both of those 2 things, and also race during my bachelor's degree. And during my master's degree, race came into it a lot because my teachers were good, surprisingly, because I'm in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you got lucky there.
Yes, I've just had good luck.
Were they white?
Yes.
Whoa. Wow. Yeah, you were lucky.
Yeah, because this is the state that I'm in, I've only managed to have 1 black university professor.
Damn.
And it wasn't even for my African American lit class.
Damn. What the hell?
It was for a math class.
I mean, diversity win technically, but also, what? Especially because I feel like, maybe it's just because I was in Little Rock, but, like, I can't understand how that you only had 1 black professor.
Well, it's just that the humanities fields tend to be overpopulated with white people and underpopulated with any other people. And so in my classes, as far as students go, the higher up you went, the less and less people of color you saw. So I graduated with only white people also. And all of the people of color who had been with me throughout my courses just steadily moved into other departments as time went on.
Fuck.
It's just, there's probably a really awful racist history there too, as to why people of color were pushed out of those fields. But that's not what we're talking about today, so I haven't done my research there.
It's okay. I mean, just in general, people of color have been pushed out of secondary education, like, since the beginning.
Yeah, there's that too. Yeah. And so all of my teachers largely weren't either. And this is Arkansas, which and being in Arkansas makes it particularly rough. Because, we have a rough climate for people of color down here, which is why I desperately would like to go elsewhere. And I just happen to have really good teachers. Several of my teachers came from the north and were down here for inexplicable reasons. And were really good. One of my favorite teachers, who a lot of people didn't like because he was old and he spit when he talked. He was like just going to college in the 60s during the civil rights movement. and he talked about it a lot, and about how it was like a horrible time, and he like opened his eyes to the plight of people who weren't like him. And so we read like in my American history class, we read almost exclusively literature written by enslaved people.
Whoa.
So we read like the biography of Frederick Douglass or Harriet Jacobs. We read her biography. We watched 12 Years a Slave in his film class that I took. And that Beasts of the Southern Wild, that was a good movie about that island off the coast of New Orleans and the impoverished black folks that live on it. I took a horror film class with him, and we watched Get Out and a bunch of other movies that largely just talked about race and womanhood as a horror device, and how you can look at how horror movies play off of like the things that those two groups of people go through in day-to-day life as a means to horror in movies all the way back to Hitchcock to now. He was just very good.
Yeah.
Rare.
Yeah, he was very old. He retired after my last class with him.
Damn.
Well, congrats to him.
Yeah, I graduated with my bachelor's degree, and then he left the next semester.
He said, well, that guy's gone. Guess I better move along.
Yeah.
I'm outie. Bye.
I took a poetry class with him once, and there were only 3 of us in there, 3 students, and he didn't cancel the class.
Wow.
That takes some balls.
He's like, make me cancel this class.
They weren't gonna. So.
Yeah, they're like, this is probably one of your last classes anyway. And he's like, bit your ass.
Bit your ass.
It was. It was my last semester. So
There
it
you
was
go.
his last semester. So, and we read almost exclusively Black poetry, Langston Hughes and Geraldine Brooks and stuff like that.
Nice. I
and
wish I
he-
liked poetry.
And he could talk about some of these people, like he met some of these people in person, some of the poets that we
What?
read. Like, they had read at the university in, like, the 70s.
What the hell? That's
Hot
so
diggity
cool.
shit.
Damn, dude.
Like, so there's a black poet who goes by Amiri Baraka, who is, like, he's, like, huge. He writes fiction and poetry, but he's huge, and his poetry it's aggressive. Like, I'm not
Whoa.
going to read any of it. He uses, like, language I'm not comfortable reading aloud, and his subject matter is aggressive, but it's needed. You should read it if you were into poetry.
Give us, write his name in the chat so we can look him up.
Oh, sure. But he came and read at the university, I guess, in like the 70s, and
Damn.
that professor had gone and seen him read, and he had met him, and I was like, Jesus, I'm so lucky that you are a cool guy and not a racist old guy.
Yeah.
Seriously, though. Like, I've had so many professors that no matter how, like, oh yeah, we're good, we're normal people who are not racist, then they pop out with, like, you're a person of color, so you're biased. And I'm like, whoa!
Hold on. What does that even mean? You're a
God,
person
I
of
will
white. You're biased.
I will never get over that. I think this is the second time I've said it on the podcast.
Yeah. I mean, it's bullshit. It deserves to be called out. Yeah.
Like, yeah, do.
And then I started with a philosophy class as an extracurricular when I was young and stupid about the topic, with a white woman who called gender, race, and class, and we just talked about the intersection between those 3 things and microaggressions and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We learned about such racist things as, like, the origin of the dish chop suey and just stuff like that, and I had no idea. I just happened to have a string of really good professors. And then in university, my primary professor came from elsewhere also, and she was already, like, ill-suited for an Arkansas university. She's she's like a loud feminist, queer, like really pushing to push the envelope of what the university wanted to be able to teach us. So like she had to like fight to get us feminist courses, and we read African American literature and feminist literature and stuff like that. And like we just made a lot of fights to get that stuff really approved properly for the
Hell yeah.
curriculum.
She sounds rad.
Thank you, past professor.
Yeah. And even for my minor, which would have been general writing, but ended up being general and technical writing combined, we studied a bunch of linguistics, which I carried into my master's degree. And in the course of doing that, I studied things like discourse in rhetoric on students' right to their own language, which was a convention and proposal and stuff. And I wrote a proposal about African American vernacular English in the classroom and carrying that over to other people's dialects and stuff. So I do have quite a lot of studying, so that I have my credentials at the front before I go talking about a subject where I'm not the center of it.
Right.
So we're doing a part 2 on the feminism episode that you guys did by yourselves, which was really good, and I've heard good things about it. So because Karen said the thing about the United States white feminism sort of like starting over in England and coming over here, I felt like I needed to also say a thing about feminism that started in the other part of the world and coming over here. Because I wasn't gonna, but now I feel like I need to. Because Karen didn't misspeak saying that, because we got people from England over here, and that's where basically everything came from that started out here.
Mm-hmm.
But since feminism didn't start over there, I feel like I should also address where like feminism in other parts of the world very, very briefly in the ancient times.
Oh.
Mostly because nobody ever talks about it.
Feminism with a lowercase f.
I was Google searching while you and Em were just like bantering a minute ago about feminism in the early days in other parts of the world. And for one thing, when I typed, "where did feminism start in the world?" it gave me England. And I said, I know that's not right.
Yeah.
So I had to type, "where did feminism start in the world, not white?" which still gave me England. And so with some real searching, I finally got it to give me some places to look. That an article from an educational magazine finally gave me something to read that wasn't about England.
Took it long enough.
But it's because we're looking at proto-feminism and not what turned into feminism with a big F, like Karen was just saying.
Mm-hmm.
We're not looking at the movements of feminism. We're looking at just like what women were doing that you could consider feminism with a big F, but that they weren't calling feminism because nobody was doing anything like a movement like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So like when you think about the way that you move through the world and the awareness that you have about like things that are going on to you, you have to think like, would you still have the mindset that you have if it weren't for like the people that came before you in this country and like the equality that you do have, even if it's limited still? If it weren't for like the people like, and I'm going to talk about them, but the people like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, because those people are the ones that people think of. So that's who I'm asking about right now. If it wasn't for those people doing the things that they were doing, do you think that you would think the way that you do, or have the things that you have, or have the mindset that you have at all?
You know, I have no fucking clue, because I don't really actually know what these people contributed.
Well, like, if feminism with a big F, if the movements of feminism hadn't have happened, do you think that you would have the mindset that you have if it wasn't for the fact that you were raised with feminism of some kind permeating the society?
Probably not, let's be honest, because, like, I grew up being raised female, and it's just, like, that kind of shit just didn't sit right. Granted, I've always been trans, but, you know.
Yeah.
But to have the expectation of being feminine, and the feminine, all that nastiness.
Mm-hmm.
The societal expectations of being a female creature in this day and age, it's astoundingly different thanks to people who have, gone through and made sure that I don't have to marry some fuckwad who, supports me and makes me stay at home all the time, and I could get a bank account with just my name on it. That's a big thing.
Yeah, it is a big thing.
Financial independence, the ability to go out and work, the ability to vote, the ability to just do things as a person who appears female in this world.
Yep.
And you agree with all of that stuff, right?
Yeah, like I don't think that we could have been anywhere without, I mean, one, I don't think that those women could have been anywhere without the people that they stepped on to get there. But yes, I don't think that we would be anywhere without a lot of these
I think I would have killed somebody by now.
Yeah. We all would have gone yellow wallpaper on this. So either that or the Great Awakening or...
Yellow wallpaper is what my heart runs on.
Yeah.
I yellow wallpaper every day.
I probably... Let's see. Which one would I have done? Lady Audley's Secret.
Read that one.
That one's really good. That is one of the first. Not one of the first, but one of the most exciting sensationalist novels. This is very good. That. Me too. Anyway, yeah. So, Remy, tell us if we're wrong or right.
Well, you can't be wrong or right about your opinion.
Exactly.
But I was just asking a question. Because it's interesting to think that knowing that you and I and Em were raised with feminism sort of permeating our society and giving us the things that we grew up with makes us the person that we are. When you think about like the medieval world and the women who were doing the things that they were doing at the time, who were like feminists without having a movement behind them, like those women, if you think about what they were doing, those people were amazing because it's not like they were raised with feminism. They weren't. Right. They weren't raised with equality, and they didn't have the internet to teach them things. A lot of them couldn't read. They didn't have anything behind them. Most of them probably didn't have mothers telling them that they should be equal to men or that they could do better or whatever. They were just like alone, like little lonely ships sailing off. They just showed up
and said, "You know what? Oh my God, I don't need this shit. Eat shit. Suck my dick." Or, not my dick, but, my...
Eat my ass, Kevin.
Eat my ass, Kevin! I am not going to make you one more roast turkey ever again. You pick up your own fucking socks off the fucking ground, or I swear to God, I will shove them so far up your asshole, you're going to be breathing in a sock balloon.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what would have happened. If not for feminism.
Wow. So women back then who weren't just alone had some support from men of the time who thought that they should have equal rights with the rest of society. So like you can look at the pre-modern period in the Islamic nations for some of the earliest examples, as you can with so many things. You can look at the Islamic nations for some of the earliest examples of basically anything. But we're talking about feminism, and you can look there for that too. No matter what people want to say. Yeah. There are a number of important figures in the Islamic nations from the pre-modern period that spoke for improving women's rights and autonomy, like Ibn Arabi, the medieval mystic and philosopher, said that while men were favored over women as prophets, that women were just as capable as men of sainthood, which, like, is what you're going to get from the 12th century, but also he didn't say that women couldn't be saints. That's what you're going to get from men of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're like, close enough, I guess.
Yeah, it is about the closest you're going to get from men of the time to support. Also in the 12th century, Islamic philosopher Ibn Rushd commented that men were stronger, but women were capable of performing all the same duties as men. Just stuff like that. He said that such duties could include participation in warfare, express discontent with the fact that women in his society were limited to being mothers and wives. It also says that during the 12th century that there were several women that were allowed to go to battle and stuff during that time period.
Fuck yeah, I bet they were hardcore.
Man.
Not a fan of battle, but you know.
I wouldn't want to go to a battle. It's kind of like dance classes for me. I would want to go to all the practices, but once recital time came around, I'm like, no, thank you. And then I stay home and eat ice cream.
Plato argued for the total political and sexual equality of women, advocating that they be members of his highest class, those who rule and fight. That was in Book 5 of the Republic. He said specifically, quote, "Are dogs divided into he's and she's, or do they both share equally in hunting and in keeping watch and in the other duties of dogs? Or do we entrust to the males the entire and exclusive care of the flocks, while we leave the females at home under the idea that the bearing and suckling of their puppies is labor enough for them?" Quote.
He really just said, nobody else has this shit, why should we?
Why should we?
Yeah. So, Plato said that the ideal state would be that women should work alongside men, receive equal education, and share equally in all aspects of the state, and that the sole exception involved women working in capacities which required less physical strength.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks, Plato.
And in the 1st century CE, the Roman Stoic philosopher Gaius Rufus entitled one of his discourses that women too should study philosophy, in which he argued for equal education of women in philosophy.
Nice. Good.
Wasn't Plato a proponent of slavery, though?
Probably most people back then were.
You have to pick and choose your battles here.
I know.
Not a fan, but you know.
Yeah, the 1st century CE was probably most people. Most people were into slavery back then.
Oh, yeah. It was, I realized that in The Good Place, because I think Chidi was so excited. He was like, "Are all of my favorite philosophers here?" And they're like, "No. A lot of them really liked slavery. So they're in the bad place." She's like, "But there is one. And I'm not going to spoil it."
Okay. Let's proceed.
And then, of course, like, popping over into Europe, where most of the white people are at, the dominant view in medieval Europe was a Christian or Catholic one, which meant that everything was biblical, which meant that they used the Bible to justify putting tons and tons of limitations on women. But other than, like, the majority opinion that you see about this is that everybody thought that way, during the medieval period, there were a lot of people that contested this idea still. Like, there's this weird thing that happens when people look back at the past, where they say that everybody is the same. Everybody thinks the same way and that nobody deviated from that pattern of thought. And it's very weird that people do that.
Mm-hmm.
Especially considering, like, that's never been the case and will never be the case.
Yeah, it would be like saying in 2022, every single person thought exactly the same about every subject all the time. And that's not how it works, except for this one person. And that's the subject of my movie today. Yeah. But that's not how it worked. There were plenty of people who didn't think that women should be put underneath so many limitations and made to be subservient or like to men or not be allowed to own property and all that stuff. And that includes people who would be recognized as like proto-feminists, and there's just like a long list of names, which I won't read, but there's a ton of them.
Those are the people who knew how to give women an orgasm.
There was a peasants' revolt that included a lot of women in 1381, which was a rebellion against serfdom, in which like just so many women were leading prominent roles in it.
Go, women!
Yeah.
Yeah, nice work, you.
Yeah, and during that revolt in 1381, the Lord Chancellor and Archbishop of Canterbury was dragged from the Tower of London and beheaded by those women.
Fuck yeah.
That woman's name was Joanna Ferror. Ferror? Something. Ferrour.
Nice work, Joanna.
Eat the rich.
Yep.
Decapitate them.
Yeah, she was very unhappy with the harsh taxes being applied. She also ordered the beheading of the Lord High Treasurer, Sir Robert Hales, for his role in the harsh taxes put against them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She also, with her group of rebels, burned down a palace
What?
and stole a duke's chest of gold.
Damn, she just kept going.
Oh, I love her.
Yeah, and another guy, the Chief Justice John Cavendish, was beheaded by another female leader of the cause named Catherine Gammon.
I love these women. Do it.
Yeah.
Down with the patriarchy. Stop the spread. One head at a time.
The women who participated in this revolt had just a huge desire to participate in it. They did all the same things that the men in the revolt did. They were just as violent as the men participating in it, if not more so. Joanna was not the only female leader, like I just said. There were actually a lot more. There was one woman who was indicted for encouraging an attack on a prison in Kent. There is another responsible for robbing a bunch of mansions, which left servants too scared to return back to work.
Oh no! I mean, we don't want them to work because servitude. Ugh. But also, aw.
Yeah. Over in Germany, there was a German canoness named Hrotsvitha.
Hrotsvitha.
Yeah, There you go. And she was born in 935. And the stuff that she was doing is still seen as important. She was the first female writer from Germany, the first female historian, and the first person since antiquity to write dramas in the Latin West.
Ooh.
Damn, she was busy.
Yeah.
La-dee-da.
I know, right?
And then, like, once you move into the Renaissance, it becomes a lot harder to talk about individual moments because women were doing a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
There was, in the Renaissance Europe, there was a, like, famous piece of witch literature, or infamous, I guess, the Malleus Maleficarum, which
Big fan.
saw
big
the publication. Yeah. Like, apparently there was a bunch of witch literature, quote, quote, floating around that, like, so, like, you can view the existence of witch literature, people have said, as proto-feminist literature, just women writing their own books to branch out, like, have their own independence. Witch literature, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Power. Witches have power.
Mm-hmm. They do.
Over my dick and my life.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, don't hex me.
Please hex me.
Hex Karen. Karen's literally asking for it. Hex girls. Sorry.
And I'm gonna put a spell on you. Gonna put a spell on you.
So, if you go over here to the Americas, you can talk about, there was a woman named Juliana, which, if you Google her, you can find her under India Juliana.
India Juliana.
Which sucks because that's just what people call her. But her name was Juliana. She's from early colonial Paraguay, and she's known for killing her Spanish colonialist masters.
Nice.
Damn. Good for her.
She was one of many indigenous women who were handed over to the Spanish colonists and forced to move to their settlements to serve them and bear children by them in the 1500s.
Barf, okay.
When she got to their settlement, she poisoned her Spaniard masters, and then when she got out of there, she boasted of her actions to her peers.
Hell yeah.
I would too.
Be like, yeah, I fucking killed those guys. Be like, go girl. Girl boss.
When the Spanish got back a hold of her, they executed her as a warning, and today she's regarded as an early feminist and symbol of liberation.
Yeah. Time to get in the Wayback Machine and fucking save her.
Like, there's a bunch of these types of women all throughout, like, the South American area. So, in Paraguay, she's seen as she's been reclaimed as a quote-unquote foremother by people, as, like, a, quote, recovery of feminist and women's genealogies in South America. But there's, like, a list of others. In Ecuador, there's one called Dolores Carcuango, and one called Transito Amaguaña. And in the Central Andes region, there's Bartolina Sisa and Maquiela Bastidas. And in Argentina, there's Maria Remedios del Valle and Juana Azurde. or Azudwai, maybe. And so
There's so many of them.
yeah, they've got lots of women with very similar stories all spread throughout this region.
Mm.
As you do.
Yeah, a researcher named Sylvia Tiefenberg says that her revenge, quote, crossed ethnic and gender barriers simultaneously.
It's, I mean, it's crazy to me because this is a very common feminist trope is, like, I read about this. This is the story of Tess of the D'Urbervilles, in which she, spoiler alert, kills her abuser to be free. And then she's executed for it. Like, it's not like this is...
It's not new.
It's not new. Like, it's, I mean, even the writer of Tess of the D'Urbervilles, a white man, understood that this was a common thing and that women were trying to liberate themselves, but they would never be free. Like, even in your freedom, you're still judged. And it's so unfair. Like, ugh. And it's heartbreaking to hear that, you know, that the intersection of it and that we didn't know about it before. I mean, power to them for killing their abusers. I just wish they hadn't been put to death for it.
Yep. Now, during International Women's Day, when they have demonstrations down there, she is, quote unquote, carried as a banner for that day, and also for the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women.
Good.
So there's just some people who don't all come from white backgrounds outside of the United States.
Yeah.
Now, the notes that I made will be less scattered because they're in a very clear story.
Oh, yeah.
And will be faster to get through.
Hell yeah.
Story. Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna open this part with somebody else's words because they're very good. This is from Beverly Guy Sheftall's book, Words of Fire, an Anthology of African American Feminist Thought. She says, quote, "The history of American feminism has been primarily a narrative about the heroic deeds of white women." Quote.
Man, she ain't wrong.
Yeah. So when people in general talk about feminism, or largely when we're taught about the movement in high school, the United States feminism, we learn about it starting at Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. They're considered like the founders of feminism, the mothers of feminism in the United States. When documentaries are made, they talk about these two women as being like the mothers of feminism in the United States. Like, take, for example, the Ken Burns documentary, Not for Ourselves Alone. Ken Burns does great documentaries. I watch a lot of documentaries. Ken Burns does a lot of documentaries. In his documentary about this topic, race is barely mentioned, racism not at all. In his documentary, there's this like comforting fiction built up that the women's movement grew largely untroubled out of the struggle for the abolition of slavery. And the reality is really different.
Yeah, sorry. I was like...
I'm listening to your, like, skeptical, like, choking live.
So, during the mid-19th century, there were alliances between those in the abolitionist movement and those beginning to advocate for women's rights. Like, for example, Frederick Douglass, who described himself as a women's rights man. The abolitionist movement and the women's movement split over the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, which guaranteed the right to vote based on a citizen's, quote, race, color, or previous condition of servitude, quote. So despite the early support of African-American men such as Frederick Douglass, suffragists like Stanton could not abide the idea that black men might get the franchise to vote ahead of white women. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton didn't hesitate to voice her opinion that white women were superior to black men and thus more deserving of the vote. So, like, I'm going to use several quotes throughout this beginning part because other people who, like, black women have written plenty of books about this, and sometimes it's just better to use their quotes about it. So here's a quote from Lori Ginsburg in her biography of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, quote, "Asked straight out whether she was willing to have the, quote, colored man enfranchised before the woman, she answered, quote," these are Elizabeth Cady Stanton's words now, No, I would not trust him with all my rights, degraded, oppressed himself. He would be more despotic with the governing power than even our Saxon rulers are, quote.
Ew.
Well, that's quite mean.
And these were not just like figures of speech or slips of the tongue. When she evoked those images of black men being like fascist dictators, like worse than white men, is basically what she called them. She was drawing upon a powerful sense of her own class and cultural superiority as a white woman.
Gross.
Just like we talked about in the Ghost of Karen's Past.
Yeah. So many people dismiss these kinds of remarks from Elizabeth Cady Stanton or Susan B. Anthony and just put that racism from those two women or the other white feminists of the time, and they just put it outside of the movement.
Mhm.
And they say, well, no, it was society and societal pressures of the time that made feminism back then turn into what it did.
No, and it's probably just that these women were racist.
Yeah, it's like you read quotes from other people writing other biographies of the movement, and they all say things like that Stanton and Anthony and the first wave feminist movement caved in, quote unquote, to the racial like pressures of the outside the movement. Like these women were just weak women who had to cave in, quote quote. Like that was a literal quote.
Gross. It's like deleting their agency and basically undoing what they're trying to do. And like, listen, if they're going to be racist, let them be racist with their whole chest, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to be careful not to sanitize history. As much as we want to be able to look up to people in the past, it's also important we acknowledge their sins. Their sins not in the Catholic sense, but in the I'll hold this against you forever sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's okay to have complex feelings about people in the past who did good things. Like these two people did good things for white women, and even their good thing for white women led to good things for black women further down the line and other women of color. But still,
it would have been like more efficient if it was just done, all at once.
You can't even also say they were just a product of their time or everybody was like that back then, because that's not true.
That's not true.
Not everybody was like that. Not everybody felt that way. Not every white person was racist. Thousands and thousands and thousands of Quakers and Shakers weren't, for example.
Yeah, let's bring in the Quakers.
Just calling back to those guys.
They knew
love
what was
those
up.
guys. They're like, ew, gross, racism.
Like, listen, you got sins in the Catholic sense.
That's bad for the butter, okay? Leave us alone.
I like that. Bad for the butter.
That's bad for the butter. I don't know where that came from. I just imagine Quakers doing the churning of the butter. I know that's not them. I know, but listen.
I mean, back then everybody was churning butter.
Yeah.
By saying that like all this racist stuff was outside the movement and none of it came from these women directly, and it was just them caving into societal pressure, it does just remove their agency as active political people that they were, and it just takes it away from them, and it shouldn't.
Listen, like, if you're wrong, just admit that you're wrong, okay? And if they're wrong, just be like, yeah, they were wrong. They were dumb and gross and racist. But aside from that, it does kind of undermine the whole argument, but not any more than, saying, well, they caved to the racism of men. I'm like, that
it doesn't fit with the rest of the shit that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, they were just as they were, regardless of what we want them to be. You can't remove that.
Exactly.
So, the political landscape between gender and race was difficult for sure in the late 19th century, but Elizabeth Cady Stanton played an active role in maintaining that sharp line between the two and using it to her advantage. So, the lady I was quoting just a minute ago, what was her name? Lori Ginsburg, recounts in her book some of the ways that Stanton's racism was an effective mobilizing tool for the women's movement. Here's a big quote. Here's a big quote. Everything I'm going to say is a quote until I say no, not quote.
Unquote.
There you go.
Unquote. So,
End quote.
quote. So, quote. Elizabeth Cady Stanton's positions on the relative worthiness of black men and white women as citizens, her choice of all too familiar racist language, had broad and lasting consequences, both theoretical and strategic, for the movement she helped lead. By claiming that some American citizens were more worthy of rights than others, Stanton helped lay the groundwork for a defense of women's rights based on race, respectability, religion, and class that would be hard to shake. Surely Stanton and Anthony understood this when they reported on the formation of a white women's suffrage association in Washington, D.C., or admitted that the proposed 15th Amendment, quote, rouses women's prejudices against the Negro, quote, while increasing his contempt and hostility toward her as an equal. Furthermore, this appeal to prejudice, whether it was an intentional strategy or not, worked. One woman wrote Stanton and Anthony's newspaper, The Revolution, to declare that she had, quote, never thought or cared about voting till began to vote. And now felt my self-respect rise, quote. She went on, quote, if educated women are not as fit to decide who shall be the rulers of this country as field hands, then where's the use of culture or any brain at all? One might as well have been born on the plantation.
Christ.
Yeah. Continuing with the quote, Elizabeth Cady Stanton had been arguing for years that it was women's lack of self-respect that caused them to defer their demands. Now white women's self-respect, as this letter writer suggested, could be heightened by comparison with people of lesser races. Pleased by evidence that women were developing their self-esteem and so would demand their rights, Stanton seems not to have worried that advocating women's rights on this basis and severing the movement's ties to its abolitionist and anti-racist roots might damage the cause's claims to universal justice. Nor did she express any concern that her use of racist language to denigrate black men, along with her implicit embrace of a politics of white racial pride, might diminish the movement's appeal to African American women themselves. Whether or not she meant to endorse an explicitly racist tactic to draw new groups of white women into the cause is impossible to know. That she published the letter entitling it "A Washington Convert" suggests that she was willing to take the risk. This is the end of the quote from Ginsburg, but if you pop over to a different source and look at some things that Elizabeth Cady Stanton herself said when black men got the vote, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, out of her own mouth, said, quote, as the celestial gate to civil rights is slowly moving on its hinges, it becomes a serious question whether we had better stand aside and see Sambo walk into the kingdom first.
I'm not aware of this term.
It's just an old racist slur toward black people.
It's a caricature. Like yeah, it's a character. Yeah, like Mammy or
got it. Don't like it.
Don't like it. Oh, that is bad. Ooh, I hate that.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Okay.
She called black folks so many derogatory names and slurs that Frederick Douglass made a public statement about how horrendous it was.
I would hope he would. Good God. I mean, I wouldn't hope that he would, because I wouldn't want him to have to listen to any of that anyway, because he's already been through so much. But I imagine that, he has quite an elegant response. Elegant? No. Eloquent?
Eloquent does it.
Eloquent. And, what's the word? Vicious. I hope it's vicious.
Basically, he said that when they're barred from doing literally anything and can't even go to school and are lynched and so on and so forth, that maybe then they can feel the way that they feel, but they can't. So,
Succinct.
And that he was appalled by the kinds of things that she was saying.
Yeah, I am too, Mr. Douglas.
Yeah, because he was still working with them at the time, but yeah. So no, like, ma'am, Miss what's her face? Whose quote I was just using? I keep losing Miss Ginsburg. Miss Ginsburg, I think that you can definitively find by her own words that, yeah, she did mean to endorse an explicitly racist tactic to draw new groups of white women into the cause. As you said, that you didn't think that you could clearly gather whether or not she did, because she she was so explicitly racist that people during her own life mentioned how racist she was publicly.
I mean, even aside from being racist themselves, it probably did, like, quote unquote, help the movement, because that's where all the money was being racist.
I mean, yeah.
Which is annoying. And I hate that.
Yeah, and like Elizabeth Cady Stanton in particular was pretty awful. I didn't really have a lot to say about Susan B. Anthony. She was your average racist, old-timey white lady. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was like the foaming at the mouth kind of racist.
The Karen with the gun.
Yeah, the Karen with the gun. She was the one who was using black people and manipulating their circumstances to try to make white people hate black people more so that they would join up with her cause.
Ew.
She used a lot of, like, you know, we stopped a long time ago caring about being political, obviously, on this podcast. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was like the Trump of her time, you know, of the women's movement. She called all black men rapists. She said that that's what they were, that they were, quote unquote, primitives, and that they shouldn't be allowed to vote because of that.
That's disgusting.
It's
really
these are gross.
These are the words out of her own mouth. So I think we can say that she was using explicit racist tactics and was explicitly racist.
Yeah.
Not to argue too much with that one historian who wrote that one book, because I don't have a published book on the subject, but that one sentence out of that big long quote really rubbed me the wrong way, because she wrote a whole book about how we shouldn't sanitize these aspects of the past, and then in one sentence at the end of that big quote, sanitized everything she just said. By saying, maybe we can't say these things are explicitly racist.
They are very incredibly racist.
Very incredibly racist.
Yeah. So.
Unless she was being sarcastic.
Oh, I don't know. You can't pick that up in text, so I just feel like I have to say it. So, Stanton and Anthony used the prospect of black women, or black people in general, getting their own rights to rile up the emotions of white women in the movement and to get new converts. And you can just see that by people writing letters saying that they never, that like, she had a lack of self-esteem, and then suddenly she didn't anymore by being so, like, riled up and emotional about the fact that those black people were going to get to vote before her.
Nothing like motivating people when it's just people are getting to have what I can't.
Yeah. So, just because the white feminist movement abandoned them, though, doesn't mean that black women stopped working for themselves, of course. There was a tradition of feminist intellectual work in nonfiction prose of black women dating back to the early 1800s, you know, before white feminist movements were going on after the Civil War. Those works are largely unknown, not talked about to white feminists. You don't usually get taught those kinds of stuff outside of, like, specialized university courses, which is really unfortunate. So, here's another quote from another really good source. I'm going to link all the sources. It's called White Women's Rights, The Racial Origins of Feminism in the U.S. by Louise Newman. And here she's talking about the explicit racial ideology white feminists use to promote their cause, defending patriarchy for quote-unquote primitives, while calling for patriarchy's elimination amongst white women. She says, quote, "Feminism developed in conjunction with and constituted a response to the United States extension of its authority over so-called, quote, primitive peoples, and feminism was part and parcel of the nation's attempt to assimilate those peoples whom white elites designated as their racial inferiors," quote.
Racial inferiors.
I'm very tired of that shit.
It just doesn't make any sense to me.
It's just us versus the other.
Yeah.
As we've been doing for fucking ever.
So, when we look at the history of feminism in the United States to understand how feminism both works for black women and against them, that their lived experiences don't match up with the stories, that sort of thing, we have to take an intersectional look at the history, which is just, again, so lacking. the word itself wasn't even coined until midway through the 1900s. So it's not a new way to look at things necessarily. It's just a new word.
Mm.
It was like the 1980s, I think, when the word was coined. So not even midway through, like toward the end of.
Fun.
So for people who don't know what the word intersectional means, here's the basic dictionary definition, which is the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. Quote, most people have some sort of intersectional thing going on with their identity that creates some sort of disadvantage, unless you are the top of it with the cis hetero white guy.
Mm-hmm. Rich cis hetero white guy.
Yes, rich has to be in there too. If you
Or
are
middle
all
class.
4 of those things, or upper middle class, yeah, and able-bodied also has to be in there.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. Easy one to forget.
Yes.
It is an easy one to forget, sadly, and it shouldn't be, because
Well,
Well,
my
because
body
if you
is
think
not
of-
abled.
we're all disabled here on the podcast, and we're like, oh yeah, that! Don't forget about this! Oh, shit.
Well, I think it's like, it's obviously not a thing, but again, white, cis, het men who are disabled are studied in history. So
One
we
was
do
president.
forget that. One was president. One was a very famous scientist. I mean, true, we can only list 2, but yeah, I again.
If you are white, cis, and heterosexual, if you're all 3 of those things, whether you're a man or a woman, you're sitting at the top of the stack of people when you're starting out this journey towards looking at things intersectionally. When you add disability, if you still have all those 3 things, you're still kind of hovering around the top, and especially if you have money. Unfortunately, that's just sort of the way it goes. The more things that you add, like if you're white, heterosexual, trans, and able-bodied, you just sort of slide a considerable distance down, actually.
Yeah, it's a weird sort of like, what is it? How do I explain this? There's like different blocks that you add, and this is a weird Tetris.
Jenga?
Jenga, maybe? I don't know. Like, you get like really big blocks if you're white, really big blocks if you're straight, really big blocks if you're cisgendered, and then other blocks are smaller and smaller and smaller, and, you know, at the end of it, you add up all your piled up blocks, and your blocks will never be the same size as the cishet white able-bodied rich guy.
Yeah.
His are the biggest blocks. It's just, this is how I'm building it in my head and how I am explaining it. I think that some people just don't think of it that way. I mean, I come off as, you know, very privileged, and I am very privileged. But there are, you know, ways in which my boxes are small, but because the way that I look, the boxes are bigger than they actually are. They look bigger. Like, you would never know, like, my underlying conditions because you can't see them.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see that I'm big, but other than that, like, and I'm only big to a doctor. Let's get that straight. Everybody else knows that, you know, I'm just marshmallow sized.
You're pretty average.
Yeah. Like, people are saying like mid-size now, and I don't know what that means. I don't know if I qualify. I don't care.
What are you, a t-shirt?
Exactly. Like, I don't fucking know. I don't know anything, y'all. I'm out here just doing my thing and just trying to use my blocks to push people's blocks further up.
Yeah, that's what you have to do. So, if you come across like you have a lot of privilege, you're going to get the benefits from the privilege, whether or not you qualify for it or not.
Mm-hmm.
People treat you differently when they look at you as a person who fits into the categories they think you fit into, if those categories qualify for privilege.
Mm-hmm.
even if you are like me and you were raised, in a profoundly poverty-stricken childhood, didn't even have a fridge or a kitchen, living in the middle of the woods half the time with no running water. I'm the kind of person that you hear sometimes from that other camp say things like, I grew up way poor, I don't have any privilege.
Right.
Well, I didn't have that kind of privilege either, but I have privilege that comes with my skin,
Yes.
looking the way it looks, and the way people
Yes.
treat people who look like me in society.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not about material things that you can buy, it's about the power that your body wields, which I think is what Karen said in her episode.
Yeah. I mean, it's just really important to be able to look at yourself and realize that, even if you're not intending something, even if you're not meaning to intimidate anyone, it can still be intimidating.
Yeah, and even when you're homeless, because I was homeless for a little while, even when you're homeless, a white homeless person and a black homeless person still gets treated differently by society.
Yeah.
Even when you are basically on the same street, you live under the same bridge, but you still get treated differently by the person looking at you from the other side of things. So that's how you look at things intersectionally. Just to give some very real examples from my own life and Karen's life just now.
Hey guys, thanks for listening, and we really appreciate it, like always. So, you may have noticed that we cut off abruptly, or, not so much abruptly. Remy works hard to get these sounding good and natural, because we had to separate this into a two-parter. I know! Amazing! So, we're going to end this one out. You can join us next week to hear the other half of this episode. In the meanwhile, you can submit questions to us at whywouldyouskthatpod@gmail.com. That is, again, whywouldyouskthatpod@gmail.com. Or you could submit it to our website, whywouldyouskthat.com. There's a handy little form there that you could fill out, and it gets emailed straight to our inbox. And we always prioritize listener questions. All right. You guys have a good one. Bye, 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 bye.